Welcome to Graft Under Watch, Episode 4. It is a special podcast brought to you by the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA. It's all about fighting corruption and organized crime. And we are focusing on the work and effort that the NPA puts in responding to these scourges. Everything from serious commercial complex crimes as well as organized crime. So, over the past few episodes, we've gotten to know a little bit more about the overall structure of the NPA, but also the various components that respond to these issues that we are talking about. And this time around, we are focusing on the organized crime component. And we want to ask, what is it? What do they do? And how does it fit in and contribute to the overall pushback against complex, serious commercial and organized crime in the country? So to help us make sense of it all, I'm joined by Advocate Elaine Moonsamy. She is Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, but also the National Organized Crime Coordinator. It's great to be with you.
Thank you, Thulasizwe.
So we'll get to grappling with what it is that you do in the organized crime component in the NPA. But my goodness, syndicates, uh, gangs, and the likes are quite the buzzword at the moment. A lot of people are talking about those things, cartels, syndicates. So we tend to move from an understanding that says we all know what it is that we're talking about when we say organized crime. But maybe we don't all have the same shared common understanding. What is organized crime? Why does it have that qualifier that says organized as opposed to saying crime?
Yeah. Thank you, Thulasizwe. So, organized crime is essentially crime being committed in a planned and coordinated way. It involves more than one individual or more than two individuals who, at some point, conspire, plan, and structure themselves in such a way in order to execute the plan that has been devised. To be honest, absolutely any crime in South Africa can be organized in nature. It can be reflected as organized crime. A murder, simple murder, or a series of murders can be constituted as organized crime, provided that there's a level of planning, there's an organization, if you want to call it that, that's involved in the executing of that plan. So, yes, organized crime is plaguing the country at the moment. It's causing us all an absolute nightmare. And, when you watch what's happening in the media, you realize the extent to which organized crime has proliferated.
Give me examples. What are the main manifestations? Various countries have their own different manifestations, right? So Italy would have dealt with the mafia, and I think certain cities in the United States, your Boston and the likes. Which manifestations do we deal with in South Africa?
So I'm not going to commit myself to saying there's one or two. There are a few that separates us and makes us unique from other countries. Previously, Tulasi, is where we had the traditional crimes, if you want to call it that, your narcotics, your cash in transit heists, and so on. And now we're seeing a proliferation of extortions, kidnappings for ransom, and of course, those previously traditional crimes that we all knew of, which is narcotics, still prevail. Your trafficking in persons, there's also a proliferation of that, human smuggling, and illegal mining has really, really taken the center stage in this country in terms of, it being coordinated, planned, involving a transnational element to it. So that's also really something that this country is grappling with.
So is it an element then that the organized crime syndicates, cartels, tend to operate almost like an entity, like a business, and everyone playing their part, almost with an organogram. You are responsible for this, you are responsible for that.
Absolutely, Thulasizwe. And that's why within the organized crime component, we've developed a strategy against organized crime. Previously in the NPA, whatever we considered loosely as being organized crime, involving two or more individuals in a group executing these crimes, was counted as organized crime. But now, because of the level of complexity and seriousness involved in the perpetration of these crimes, the NPA is now focusing exclusively, I'm talking about the organized crime component in particular,
Yeah.
is focusing exclusively on addressing serious and complex organized crime. And when we talk about serious and complex, we're talking about your kingpins, your criminal networks. And of course, structure is important for them to execute their criminal activities. You have a kingpin who is overall in charge, and then you have the runners. Typically, in a narcotics grouping, for instance, you will have a kingpin who never ever gets his hands dirty, and then you will have various layers in terms of your dealers, your runners, who are the people that actually sell these goods or commodities. And so there's various levels. Structure is important for these criminals in order for them to not just execute their plans, but also to survive, because their networks are very close. Involving
Yeah.
very little outside, engagement or interaction. And so, of course, the more people they're exposed to, or the more people that are roped into their organizational structure, causes a risk for them
Yeah.
to be penetrated in terms of, the police then identifying the relevant
Keeping
people
the
and so on.
network tight,
Keeping the network tight. And,
such that you can control it.
Yeah.
So if they are that organized, then I imagine that we, on the side of the people, then also have to be equally organized from a legislative policy perspective, but also structurally, which is where you come in. Tell me about the component itself. Who are you? What do you do?
Okay, so the organized crime component is one of the components within the NPA. We have a national structure where we deal with policies, dealing with more strategic issues, making training available to the rest of the components in the country. So each of the provinces in the country have their own organized crime components. So these are the regional structures. And each component in the region is headed by a regional head. They are the actual foot soldiers, the boots on the ground, who are the people that are prosecuting these cases. And when I talk about prosecuting, in terms of the strategy against organized crime in the NPA, our approach is very much a more project management approach or prosecutor guided investigation approach. So you will get, depending on the complexity of the matter, you could get several projects that make up a program, and we have that in the illegal mining space where it's really very large, and we have to call it a program involving several projects with different structures in each project that have been identified. And there we would obviously apply the project management approach, but then generally our cases or projects are prosecutor guided. And from the very inception, the prosecutors get involved with the investigating officers. We guide the investigations. I think one of the really critical issues that we have to take into consideration is our FATF obligations, our Financial Action Task Force obligations. Us being a member country of FATF, we have an obligation to address money laundering and terror financing. And both money laundering and terror financing fall within the organized crime space. When we were in the grey list, Thulasizwe, the FATF wanted, they were actually pushing South Africa to provide evidence of us dealing with serious and complex money laundering. And that would include your third-party money launderers, your professional enablers, your professional money laundering networks. And for a long time, we thought these cases would be found in the Specialized Commercial Crime Unit, but that's actually not the case. Our professional enablers, your lawyers, your accountants, are found within the organized crime space, where they are assisting criminal networks and kingpins to launder proceeds. And we know organized crime is based on the strategy of profit, right? And so, in order for us to deal with the profit, we need to conduct parallel financial investigations.
Yeah.
Those investigations must start from the inception of the investigation into the predicate crime.
Sure. So you've been talking quite a bit about the organized crime strategy within the NPA, and I'm getting that this is where your passion is at the moment. Without revealing too much of the game plan for the other side, what does it look like? What's your focus in terms of dismantling syndicates and cartels and the likes?
Okay, so our motto is to disrupt, dismantle, and deliver to the people. And this strategy is a 5-pillar approach where we look at identifying the criminal markets at the inception, the key criminal markets that are priority for this country for us to address. And when I talk about criminal markets, I'm talking about, the crime types. So you would get illicit wildlife trade, you would get illegal mining, narcotics, trafficking in persons, cash in transit heists, ATM bombings. So all of these are criminal markets. Now, in terms of the first pillar of the strategy, and let me take you back to what I said right at the inception, our intention is to deal with kingpins and criminal networks. And so the first pillar basically addresses your key criminal actors within your specified criminal markets. And so the idea is that if we address those kingpins in that criminal market, we're disrupting that entire criminal market. The second pillar is identifying criminal actors that operate across criminal markets. So if we identify those kingpins, we then not just addressing one, but several criminal markets that they operate in. When we have to arrest them and so on, we're addressing more than one criminal market. The third one is essentially strategic prosecutions in order to remove incentives for them to commit crimes. And this is where we would have to strategize with the police in terms of, your co-location strategy, are sitting together, driving the investigations right from the inception, identifying your targets, identifying what parallel financial investigations must be done, identifying whether international cooperation is required, such as a mutual legal assistance if it's transnational in nature. And then the fourth pillar addresses your key criminal actors within a specific region. So, for instance, in Mpumalanga, their priority would be illicit wildlife trade, more specifically your rhino poaching.
Yes.
That might not necessarily be the priority in the Western Cape, which deals with gangs. So it's basically identifying what your priorities are for the region. And finally, the fifth pillar deals with your strategic use of laws, and that would be your POCA, your Prevention Against Organized Crime Act. And POCA is very specific in terms of the areas that it covers. It covers your racketeering, it covers money laundering, it covers gangs or criminal gang activities, and it also covers your asset recovery processes, which is your Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. And so this strategy is basically a multi-dimensional and a collaborative way of addressing organized crime in the country.
So a few things jump at me from what you said. I don't imagine you'll give me a list of the kingpins that you're targeting, but sitting where you are right now, you know exactly who would constitute a top 10 of the kingpins in the various criminal markets and regions.
Strange that you asked me, Thulasizwe, because we've actually developed a top 10 list for the country. We are working with the police to, address the targets that are reflected on that list. So we do have a list of top 10 cases that we've identified, and we're busy prioritizing those cases and to move them from investigations into prosecutions. The thing is, when these cases get enrolled, and because of judicial discretion, the prosecution have very little, control over those matters. We are faced with delay tactics by the defense or legal representatives and so on and so forth. So the strategy is to basically fast track investigations and to get these matters quickly onto the court roll, because in doing so, we're disrupting and dismantling. And then we've also looked at a top 5 list as well. So, where we're now taking the financial angle in terms of addressing the top 5 cases that we want to make sure that we bring to court. So, we're addressing them from a financial angle. And we know that, finance and profit is a big thing for criminal organizations. And so we know that once we address the profit element, we're going to dismantle these criminal networks. And then we also have established a firearms desk at National Office, where we know that organized crime is actually it's fueled by corruption and the circulation of illegal firearms. And so we've established a desk at the National Office where we are busy working with the police to identify or sift through the legal firearms and the illegal firearms. And the focus, of course, is on the illegal firearms. And we were looking at issues like how they're brought into the country, who are the people that are selling the firearms, where are they located in terms of, prevalence, in terms of the sale of these firearms, and so on and so forth. And we believe that once we make a dent in respect of that criminal market, the illegal circulation of illegal firearms, we definitely will be able to make a dent on violent organized crime in this country.
How difficult are these crimes to prosecute, Advocate Moonsamy, given what you just said about these networks are people of means usually, and will go to great lengths to stifle and frustrate a prosecution. And that's not helped, I imagine, by the fact that even the requirements for some of the crimes within poker are quite high. The bar is quite high. Yeah.
So that's quite an important question, because one of the biggest considerations we had to make when developing the strategy against organized crime was the involvement of the asset forfeiture unit and asset recovery processes. And we believe that, and through this PGI methodology that we use, the asset forfeiture unit must be present right from the inception during the guiding of the investigations. It's really incumbent on the prosecution team, the investigative team, as well as asset recovery, the asset forfeiture unit, to ensure that asset recovery does take place. So the strategy against organized crime makes provision for an effective value chain to operate. So it starts from crime intelligence being generated into effective or reliable investigations, into successful prosecutions, and that entire process is underpinned by asset recovery. Now, initially, the thought was to put asset recovery at the end of the value chain, but that's not the case. Asset recovery starts right from the inception. In order for us to prevent that scenario of the accused using the proceeds of crime to fight us, the state, in court, the idea is to attach proceeds right at the inception through the Chapter 6, which is your civil recovery process, and not wait for the finalization of the criminal case to take place, which will be your Chapter 5 process. So the idea is to bring more Chapter 6 applications to court, and to remove those proceeds and the profits that these criminal networks have derived, so as to avoid that scenario where they use the very same proceeds to fight us in court.
So, how important are high impact cases that showcase your seriousness in the fight against organized crime, but also bolster the morale and motivation and advance your strategy as well? And if you can share a few of those.
We do have several cases that we do have on the court roll. We also, as I said right at the inception, organized crime can relate to any criminal type. And so, they vary from economic crimes to violent crimes and so on. And, under the extortion space, for instance, and, without giving too much, we have identified through a project a big extortion case relating to public transport. And there is the arrest in that case is imminent. So we're working very closely with the police. We have another extortion case, which is on the court roll, where the accused was was convicted in January, and the matter is now postponed for sentencing to the end of March. And we're expecting, and that relates to the construction mafia. We've got another extortion matter also relating to construction mafia in relation to a police station that is being renovated in the Eastern Cape, where the accused are on the court roll and that case is started. These are big cases. And I'm certain that once the accused are sentenced in these matters, it will definitely act as a deterrent from others wanting to engage in similar type of activities, especially in respect of your networks and your organized criminal activities.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, there are going to be one or two of those extortion cases that are going to be perpetrated, but we are, in terms of the strategy, and the idea behind the strategy is not to only exclusively deal with serious and complex organized crime. There are other type of organized crime cases that will be dealt with by the NPA. It's just that they won't be dealt with by the specialized unit. It will be dealt with by the lower court prosecutors. And with that comes a lot of training, a lot of capacitation, because these prosecutors are now required to deal with these matters. And so we are dealing with organized crime in terms of the strategy across the board. And so, this is not a strategy that is, a general strategy for the entire NPA. It's a strategy that's actually quite bespoke, in that we've developed an implementation plan and an intake criteria. So we've developed a national intake criteria and a national implementation plan. And then each region or each province was to go back and develop their own intake criteria and their own implementation plan based on their province's priorities. And so we've done that exercise, and we're now in the implementation stage. And because of the implementation, we were able to identify our top 10 cases.
Yeah. Speaking of the implementation phase, then, 2025 was characterized by, among others, quite a number of high-profile prosecutions in the ganglands, to use that word, in the Western Cape. How important is that as a specific crime market?
Thulasizwe, it's actually become a nightmare for us. So much so that the Minister of Police, who visited the Western Cape towards the end of last year, came back and had discussions with the Minister of Justice. And so a meeting was held where we spoke about the development of a stabilization plan to stabilize provinces like the Western Cape that are plagued by gang violence. And so the NPA and the SAPS sat together and we developed a stabilization plan, which is extremely well received by law enforcement partners. We are in the process of implementation, so it's already been rolled out in the Western Cape, and we're already seeing successes in the Western Cape. The next phase of rollout was in PE, and we went to PE and we spoke to the police there, the provincial commissioner. We spoke with the DPCI was also present, and we rolled out that stabilization plan in PE because if you're aware, the president has now pronounced that the SANDF will be deployed to various provinces, in particular, various areas that are plagued by violence. And so PE is one of the provinces that have been identified. And so the second rollout was there. And we are in the process of rolling out the stabilization plan to the other provinces. And the importance of the stabilization plan, similar to the NPA strategy against organized crime, is for us to work in that multi-agency approach, where we sit at the outset and identify our key targets that we want to address, and who are operating within these various spaces. In the Western Cape, we've already done that identification, and as I said, we are in the implementation phase. And so we believe that this stabilization plan, once rolled out to all of the provinces will definitely create some form of stability in the country in terms of addressing organized crime. And of course, we are here to deliver and serve the interests of the people. And people are concerned about organized crime, going through the roof, basically. And so, there really was that need for us to have done something urgently to address it. And I think this will definitely allay some of the fears and also the concerns that the communities have.
And I'm picking up the importance of a multi-agency approach to it all, components and units within the NPA, but beyond that, collaboration with other agencies, your DPCI, crime intelligence. A lot of South Africans are watching the goings on in the current public inquiries and wondering how's that working out for that collaboration, because you as prosecutors are only as good as the kind of the detective and investigative work that has gone into it.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, actually, because our case is as good as, what is brought to us. It's good as what is contained in the docket. If you have poor investigations conducted, you're obviously going to court with a poor product, or you're not going to court at all. So yes, we rely heavily on the police. But what's critical for us to understand, Thulasizwe, is that it's not just the NPA and the SAPS. Yes, of course, within the SAPS, you have your various components, your crime intelligence, your SAPS detectives, your DPCI. And even within those structures, they have smaller components as well. But we're going through it with a bang in terms of using other law enforcement partners as well, such as your South African Revenue Services, your Financial Intelligence Center, because the financial aspect is a big thing for us. We believe that if we address the profit and remove that, we're starting to already make dents and disable kingpins and criminal networks. We've also, as I said, got the FIC on board to assist us with our financial flows and our financial analysis. And through that process, we're able to pick up who our enablers are, our professional enablers, our professional money launderers. So we're not just doing this for organized crime. We're doing this for the country as a whole, to address various other issues like our FATF obligations that I spoke about earlier.
Is there an interface between organized crime and public procurement that you are looking at in terms of some of these syndicates and networks, sort of building networks within the state,
Yes,
such that they're able to have their way, quote
yes,
unquote?
absolutely. We think that the procurement issue falls squarely within the specialized commercial crime unit. But when you look deeper, you will find a lot of it involving our politically exposed persons, people that are in the, in the state actors, if you want to call them that, who are in the public space, who are there to do a job for the interests of the communities and the public, but are actually utilizing those very specific roles to assist in the perpetration of organized crime and organized criminal activities. They are assisting criminal networks. And one example, and that's in the media already, is the Malusi boy matter in the Western Cape, where, he was part of the mayoral committee and assisted, a criminal gang leader, Ralph Stanfield, and his wife, to secure government contracts or procurement contracts, and was also assisted in laundering proceeds of crime through various companies that were set up by these criminal gang leaders. And so we also find that in the extortion space, where procurement is takes the center stage, and where criminal gangs now jump onto the bandwagon, to hide behind or claim that 30% in terms of the legislation that makes provision for previously disadvantaged people, to acquire some gain in terms of that procurement or procurement contract. And so a lot of them have jumped onto the bandwagon, and now it's no longer about empowering the communities that these contracts were supposed to serve. It's now about enriching criminal gangs and criminal groupings.
But how easy is it though to keep an eye on it? Because it sounds to me, and certainly from the public revelations and inquiries we've been witnessing, as if we've moved from, in order to gain some financial flows from the state procurement, we will quote unquote bribe an official to, that's our man on the inside,
Yeah.
that's our woman on the inside. We
Yes.
may not be calling upon them to do something now, but they remain hooked onto the network, and they know their role exactly as and when it comes up for them to
Yeah, no,
play it.
absolutely. And as I said at the outset, corruption and firearms are the two drivers that motivate or allow organized crime to thrive. Without corruption, we won't, organized crime wouldn't be thriving the way it is at the moment. And it's because of the very reason that you just explained. And it is true. It's extremely difficult because they involve as I said, state actors, people that are working in government, within state departments, within law enforcement agencies, as we see through these various commissions. It's very difficult, certainly, to identify. And I think because of all the challenges that was exposed now, especially within the South African police services, it was very difficult for us to identify them at the outset, either because they were the very same corrupt individuals involved in that space who were supposed to be detecting, but then, utilized it for their benefit, to secure contracts and so on for their cronies or friends. But I think now with whatever is coming out in the public space, it's making it easier for us to start connecting the dots and start identifying the connection between state actors and our criminal groups. And that work has already started. And if you recall recently, the National Commissioner and the Minister of Police, as well as the NDPP, spoke in the media that they've identified a task team that will be addressing all of these cases that have come out now through the commissions, and that these task teams will comprise of both the police and prosecutors. And so we're expecting a lot more cases, other than the ones that have already been identified, but a lot more cases coming forward for us. So we're going to be very busy in the next couple of months, within the organized crime components.
Do we as South Africans have reason to worry about transnational organized crime? One of my own worst fears is these South American cartels
Yes.
gaining a meaningful foothold on South African soil because of the track record of what they've done in the countries where they originate from. That gets me worried. It
Yeah.
keeps me awake at night.
No, it's definitely a something that we flagged within law enforcement. And yes, of course, there is definitely a transnational element to organized crime, not just within the African region, but globally. And so it doesn't just have an impact from the other neighboring countries, but the other countries in the South Americas and Europe. Mainly from South America, where we have in fact had arrests of members from Mexico, who have come here to set up drug laboratories in rural areas like Limpopo, Northwest, and those places. We've had very good interventions by the asset forfeiture unit as well, where we were able to recover proceeds, and we've seized assets as well. So we have identified, and I think the mere acknowledgement that there is transnational organized crime impacting this country is important. And we are in the process of developing a transnational organized crime strategy. In fact, it's at its tail end of development. We believe that it will have to go to cabinet soon, and then once the necessary approvals are obtained, we will proceed with implementation. Now, that transnational organized crime strategy is the country strategy to deal with organized crime. And I believe that once we have this country strategy in place, we as a country, not just in law enforcement, but in other areas such as your financial sector, we all the public-private partnership, becomes really critical for us as a country to address organized crime. Organized crime is not just a SAPS and an NPA initiative or to address. It's something that the entire country must address.
Yeah.
And I believe that in the private space in particular, we have excellent resources that we as law enforcement can leverage on and can utilize for the purposes of advancing our investigations and even prosecutions to address these kingpins and criminal networks. As you said, Thulasizwe, they are extremely well resourced. So we as law enforcement agencies, the private sector have to collaborate. We have to work together in order for us to strengthen our resources to address organized crime.
One of the other worries is about what is known as grey listing, the Financial Action Task Force, and all of the requirements that we needed to display. And for a long time, we were working through that list of commitments that we needed to fulfill so that we get off that grey list. We are out of it, but it's not permanent, is it? So what do you say to a South African who's worried about that possibility that we may be found wanting within areas that fall within your line of work and other agencies as well, your money laundering and other issues that we talked about?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, if you want to call it that, I wear two caps. So, I am not just the national coordinator for the organized crime component in the NPA, I am also the chairperson of the NPA's anti money laundering desk. And so, we are responsible for coordinating all the efforts from both especially the NPA side, but I also chair the law enforcement work stream where all the law enforcement agencies sit together on a monthly basis and we have discussions on, the statistics and the case studies that we need to identify for purposes of addressing our FATF obligations. And yes, of course, FATF wants to see us dealing with serious and complex money laundering and terror financing. Serious and complex basically involves your third party laundering, which is other people assisting criminals or criminal groupings to launder proceeds of crime that has been generated. And that would be your professional enablers, your professional money laundering networks, your professional money launderers whose jobs it is to facilitate money laundering in the country. And so we've identified various cases. Fortunately for us as a country, we went through the grey listing process. Unfortunately, it was unfortunate for the financial sector where we took a knock in terms of investments and so on. But for us as a country, we had learned extremely good lessons from that grey listing process.
Yeah.
It forced us to collaborate, to work closely together. It forced us to work with the private sector in terms of addressing money laundering.
So it was the jolt we needed in a way.
Absolutely. And as I said, the type of cases that FATF wanted to see in terms of third-party money laundering, previously we thought was solely within the space of the commercial crimes component. But we've actually found that they're actually more located within the organized crime component because that's where you're finding your professional enablers. People where criminal groupings are generating large sums of proceeds, through their criminal activities. And they have to find ways of laundering this money and moving it away from them, their bank accounts, their families' accounts. So they have to obviously hire people, professionals to do that job for them, which is your professional enablers, your lawyers, your accountants, people that set up companies to launder proceeds of crime. And so we're identifying a lot of those cases within the organized crime component. And as I said, the strategy that we've employed in the organized crime component space is a strategy not just to address organized crime, it will in fact address our money laundering obligations as well.
One thing that these criminal networks are known for is just how dangerous they are, and not leaving anything to chance, leaving no loose ends. As you are talking, I'm thinking about the work that the prosecutors do,
Yes.
being at the front line of this fight. What are the biggest risks that your prosecutors face on a daily basis in this work, and how do you mitigate against those risks?
Yes, Thulasizwe, of course, it comes with the job that there are huge amounts of risks for prosecutors who prosecute these cases. I remember the one time when I was based in Mpumalanga, and a prosecutor was required to prosecute a case involving a taxi boss. And she called me and she was just so shaken, and she wanted to know whether she could actually cover her face, wear a scarf around her face, before going into court, because of the fear that she had to address somebody who lives in the community that she lives, who lives in the community that she works in, and who knows her whereabouts, who knows her family. And so the risks are huge. And, we try to provide protection for prosecutors. There are times where the protection is not adequate. We also want prosecutors to, be aware and be cautious of the spaces that they engage in and what they reveal to people in the social space, in your social media platforms, and so on. And not to reveal too much about the type of cases that you're dealing with, because everyone is connected in some way or the other, and this information is bound to go to the very people that we're trying to address. So, we do provide protection to prosecutors, and of course, it's activated through their DPPs, or Directors of Public Prosecutions, to national office, and then that process, unfolds. With regards to, in terms of the Western Cape in particular, where there's a greater or heightened amount of risk to prosecutors, where high levels of violence are used, the circulation of illegal firearms, gang activities, all of that, provides a huge risk to the prosecutors, who also come from the very communities that they're prosecuting in or live in. And so, in terms of the stabilization plan, one of the strategies is, not to, especially with your high-profile kingpins or gang leaders, those cases will be dealt with within the prison confines. So we set up our courts within the prison confines, and those postponements and so on and so forth are dealt with in the prison environment. So there's no need for that prisoner to be removed from the prison, because every time that prisoner comes out of prison and comes to the court space, it creates a risk for the people that are within that space,
They
within
have
that
that set
court
up at
environment.
Kosimampuru, don't they? I
They
think
have
I've
it in
seen it.
Kosimampuru,
Yes.
they do. We're also looking at rotating prisoners amongst prisons, your high profile prisoners, so that visitors that go to those prisons, the number of visitors are reduced. And also, the more visitors you have, the more risk there is of, illegal commodities being taken into the prisons, like your drugs, your firearms, weapons, or whatever the case is, cell phones. And one of the other things, Thulasizwe, that I wanted to also inform you is, there is now this awareness of organized crime that is linked to the prison environment. We know that there's a lot of organized crimes perpetrated from the prison space, or the confines of the prison walls. And so there's now this focus on addressing criminal, prison-linked organized crime. And so we are in engagements with correctional services, and we're finding ways in terms of, trying to remove that threat coming from the prison itself, and of course, to reduce the levels of perpetration of these crimes.
And lastly, you have a new boss.
Yes.
The new NDPP is in place now, Advocate Andy Mutibi, and organized crime. Right straight off the bat, he has made it clear that will be one of the key focus areas. What are your marching orders from him, and how do we, as the rest of society, help you
Yes.
succeed?
So, yes, it's really unfortunate that he comes in at a time where organized crime is, really gone through the roof. And of course, he is under pressure to, effectively deal with organized crime. And I'm certain it's for various other principles in the other law enforcement partners space. But for me, the discussion with the NDPP is that we should have a governance plan, where we must be able to. He is extremely grateful for the work that has already been done in terms of the development of the strategy against organized crime, the implementation plans, the intake criterias, the setting up of the desks, our efforts from the FATF perspective. But he wants a governance framework for us to pull all of these things together and start monitoring to see the impact that we are making in the country. And, with organized crime, it's no longer about counting numbers and statistics, because that doesn't really give a true picture of the status of organized crime and the impact that we've made in terms of addressing certain individuals involved in organized crime. And so he wants to basically see the impact that we are having on the communities, the society where these crimes are being perpetrated. And that's a very difficult measure, because you have to make such a big impact or dent in that community for them to feel that a kingpin has now been removed, or an entire network, a syndicate, has been removed. So it's a tall order, but we are up to it. We're working very closely with him. We provide him with inputs. We've met with the National Commissioner of Police last week, to see how we can align ourselves better. And the National Commissioner was quite receptive of the various proposals we've made and the recommendations. And he will also be roped into that governance plan that the NDPP wants to develop. We started that work, and of course it's going to take some time, but it will be inclusive of the SAPS in terms of really understanding the impact that we've made on society.
All right, we wish you all of the best. Certainly a lot of work, important, critical work to be done still ahead. Advocate Elaine Moonsamy, Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, National Organized Crime Coordinator, on this episode of Graft Under Watch.